Vorf had always suffered for his name. It wasn't unusual, and that was probably what his mother considered the point. But that didn't make the teasing any easier. Of course, when the scales on his hands grew, the teasing from the magicalist transformed into worship. But the denizens of Draco who shared his abilities maintained their cruelty for years to come. A foreigner, even an educated Mancer, might think this meant that Vorf only had to deal with a few recurring bullies. After all, Dracomancers are rare. Unfortunately, the only rare aspect of Dracomancer was how many survived the testing ritual. All Mancers had one, a dangerous activity that would have killed any magicalist without question, something that brought out the true powers of a Mancer. Cryomancers froze themselves, Toximancers poisoned themselves, Ferromancers poured molten metal over themselves, and Dracomancers fought a dragon. Not one of the forest dragons that occasionally stole livestock from the magicless farms. No, Vorf was already certain he could do that. In fact, he had actually helped on a hunt before. No, his teachers insisted that it only worked if one felt the blue flame of a mountain dragon. Other dragons merely breathe fire. You might as well be a pyromancer. Mountain dragons, however, now they breathe the true flame of Draco. That was what Master Arvin had told him, hundreds of times. Vorf wanted to sigh as said Master repeated it to the untested, all hopeful that they could remove the title today, and shaking in their boots at the idea that they might die with it. But instead he smiled. Trust in Akmar, my child. He sent the devoured god to slay the dragons, knowing he was weakened from his rebellion, and the dragons consumed him. What little is left of him in the temple, however, retains the strength of the god he once was, and Akmar allows Dracomancers to take his power and become one with the dragons. It was something his father had always told him, and for whatever reason he found it comforting. There was some practical element of his mind that wondered how he was supposed to survive this encounter when a god couldn't. Slightly ridiculous, considering Master Arvin had done so when he was much less than a god, or noting how that glorious destiny didn't apply to a lot of young Dracomancers. Most Mancers, in spite of how brutal the practice may seem, could survive the testing. The same magic that gave them their powers saved them from the grip of death right before it happened, if they were ready. If they weren't, well, there's a reason the process is called testing. Dracomancers, however, can only be ready for the dragon's breath, and, according to their master's stories, have the power to calm the beast, whatever that means. If the dragon chose to whip them with its tail, or step on them, or grab them in its jaws, then a Dracomancer's body reacted in the same manner that a magicalist would. Vorf knew why he had scales and talons on his hands. He knew all the stories about Akmar and how the 12 lesser gods had rebelled, their immortal bodies tossed to the mortal world and put into eternal torture, their only remaining function to provide the Mancers with their powers. He understood the concept of the 13th unnamed god, who would one day bring about the end of the world, and who others blasphemously called the Devourer due to his similarity with some monster from Secton's folklore, and he even understood the equally blasphemous claim that the fungoids were a sign of its coming. What he didn't understand is why his people were cursed with the most vicious and lethal testing of all the Mancer nations. While the others probably weren't thinking exactly along those lines, they were certainly terrified of the trial ahead. Poor little Nefkin was shaking his boots. Zorlist had his chin held high, but if one looked, one could see the occasional nervous twitch. Looking down the row of his fellow untested, Vorf was slightly surprised to see no difference in reactions among the males and females. Either way, Master Arvin did nothing to ease their fears. If anything, his presence made them worse.
All right, you little bastards, we have work to do. Now allow your scales to feel the scales of the devoured god's foes.
Closing their eyes and opening their fists, the Dracomancers listened for the sound of the beast that ate the fallen heretic, that ate the beasts of the land that would dare oppose it, that hopefully wouldn't eat them in a few minutes. The darkness smothering Vorf's vision seemed to dissolve, spots of light appearing ever so slightly, slowly at first, and then faster, and then faster, and then faster, and then faster, and then BAM! The full glare of the sun burst beneath his eyelids, blazing down on the dry, gray scales of the sleeping monstrosity. It was massive. Even with its torso covered by folded wings, Vorf could see enough of its head, and more importantly its several rows of jaws, to decide that this was a creature that should not be messed with by any sane being. From the sounds surrounding him, he could barely make out that Nethkin was screaming for his mother, and Zorlist had fainted.
Can anyone get a location on the creature?
Master Arvin could. The sick bastard knew that very well, but he wanted the untested to do this for him. Vorf wondered how many could hear Arvin, as to him what was clearly a shout came in as a distorted whisper. Still, Vorf heeded the instructions, straining his vision as far from the dragon as his magic would allow him, and creating the same sensation one feels when pushing one's eyeballs to the limits of the lid. He was barely able to make out a rock formation he recognized from the hundreds of boring lectures on local geography every Dracomancer was required to take. "It's by Akmar's tooth!" Vorf shouted, his vision ending with a painful snap as he opened his eyes without thinking.
Well, that's an appropriate place. Can anyone confirm?
"Akmar's tooth!" some girl called out a few minutes later.
Good! Now everyone snap out of it!
A good 3/4 of the untested, who hadn't already lost control and dropped the vision, followed Arvin's orders, but a small minority remained in said vision. Their bodies didn't move, even to breathe. Arvin sighed.
It happens every year. If these kids can't maintain sensory awareness when they're sensing a dragon, they're not ready for a testing.
He glanced toward the magicless servants attending the event.
Take the ones who can't hear back to their villages. Take the ones over 25 to the order.
Too long untested, Vorf thought. The worst fate of them all. Nethkin and Zorlist tried to keep up with Vorf, but he proved too quick for them. Their nerves made them overly cautious, checking behind every tree and rock for some fearsome dragon. Vorf was terrified too, but he chose to channel the feeling. Terror was much more useful when one used it to avoid danger rather than delay it. "Hurry it along, Zorlist! You don't want to miss your chance with some girl later. If you get harrowed, maybe a Dracomancer woman will actually look twice at you." Zorlist's failed attempt to cover up his horror at the upcoming challenge immediately vanished. "I'll have you know that I have had plenty of experience with the opposite sex. Magicless girls don't count. Flash some scales and glowing dragon flame and they think you're a god. It's almost blasphemous." "You know, I heard that magicless girls aren't allowed to say no, so they really don't count," Nethkin interrupted. Zorlist looked ready to slap his companion for that, but Vorf found himself unable to decide whether or not he wanted to laugh at the statement. Only last week a master had been castrated for mating with a student, and they all had a lecture about why that was wrong. The man had power over her. The girl couldn't say no, they had been told. Why would it be any less wrong with Magicless? He voiced the thought out loud. "Because, you idiot, the girl last week was a Dracomancer, and the Magicless girls are, well, magicless. They haven't been blessed by the devoured god, or any of the fallen gods, and so they need our protection and rule. Imagine what would happen if they were allowed to leave their villages, or do commerce without our orders. Why, they'd make all sorts of stupid decisions and probably get eaten by Sectons. What, do you want them to go to the same schools as us so we can all waste our time educating them?" Vorf frowned. Of course he didn't support such a ridiculous notion. "That's absurd, but hurting them? Oh, come on, Vorf. We're not hurting them. What do you think we are, biomancers? It's enjoyable, just not always comfortable. We don't need to make the magicless comfortable." "I suppose you're right. Come on, we have to find this dragon." While Vorf couldn't explain why that conversation left him uncomfortable, he was able to put it out of his head for a while. Potentially being eaten by a massive reptile that breathed fire, it turns out, served as an excellent distraction. As the trio climbed the increasingly steep mountainside, sharp rocks protruding from the ground at even greater angles, Each step becoming just a little bit more difficult, the doubts set in. Of course they did. Though they never talked about it, Vorf was certain that every Dracomancer, if not every Mancer, had the exact same doubts. Am I ready? The feeling of readiness was impossible to know before one felt it. This was supposedly Akmar's test. Vorf secretly wished Akmar would get away from the teaching career, though he'd never say it out loud. Occasionally he even felt guilty thinking it in his head, though he usually consoled himself by noting how many others broke much more important rules. Zorla supported that very consolation when he slammed his foot into a rock and immediately screamed, "Akmar's bleeding balls!" It amazed Vorf that so many could claim to follow Akmar, and even get angry when his will was challenged, yet do so little to live by the commands the holy text laid down. He wondered if this was a flaw caused by the unnamed god, as many priests would claim, or a flaw with Mancers. If it were the latter, then why follow Akmar at all? Why bother to get so bothered by Akmar's will when no one was willing to follow it? These thoughts were distracting him way too much. He needed to get his head back in the game. Vorf could worry about the fate of Mancer and Magicless when he was harrowed and went through with his plan to become a Storian or a priest. For now, he had a mountain dragon to survive. "Where is the damn thing again?" Zorlist asked. "He's got the point. Do you know that you're going in the right direction?" Vorf sighed. "If you want, you can try to look through its eyes and double-check." Zorlist scoffed at the idea, but Nefkin seemed to be considering it when they were all interrupted by a piercing shriek and what sounded to be a forest dragon, whose roar was amplified by the most powerful sound enhancer in the world. All three stood still, completely silent. "I guess another group found it first," Vorf said. His voice lacking any variation in tone. Nefkin's eyes, still unblinking, seemed barely able to move his mouth when he responded. "Do you think they'll kill it?" "We'll find another if they do. Besides, they only need to survive its breath." With that statement, a little bit of Vorf's demeanor returned, and the entirety of Zorlest ran in the opposite direction. "Zorlest, you idiot! Do you want to stay untested until they cut your hands off?" "You lunatics can do whatever you want. I'm not dying to that thing." "Why wouldn't you want to?" Nefkin asked this question with a calm that made both Zorlist and Vorf pause. "It can only kill you once, and in quite a fascinating manner. Having no hands, though, that's a death that kills you several times over." "You're not even magicless, then. You're less than magicless." Facing that dragon isn't courage. For courage, you have to sacrifice something, and if you run away now, you lose everything. Standing before it and letting it either test you or kill you is the most cowardly, and incidentally the smartest thing you can do. Your other options are to spend the rest of your life with no hands, no magic, no dignity, and no worth. Magicless children will see you on the side of the roads and be disgusted. Or you can run away from the Order and live life as a criminal or an anarchist until the buildup of untested magic drives you insane. We're insane, Zorlist? You are choosing the path of a madman." Nefkin's declaration almost convinced Zorlist to change his mind. It probably would have, if not for the dragon's second roar. Hearing that sent the poor little Dracomancer on his way. "I pity him," Nefkin stated before heading in the direction of the roar. Vorf, unnerved by Nefkin's speech, stared in the direction Zorlist had chosen for a minute or two before following his companion to the dragon's nest.